All right, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from the media and diplomats and members, it's a great pleasure to actually host this session. As China is not a country but a continent, I'm very happy that I can share this with my colleagues. We have, as you know, 7 chapters, Beijing being one of them. And we have chapters in Shenyang, in Tianjin, Shanghai, Nanjing, and South China stands for offices in Chongqing and Chengdu. And we have South China, where we have an office in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. I'm very happy to do this. We have done it before already in this kind of setting. The last one, I guess, was on energy. It is on the record, and so you can quote us. And we have also the opportunity that you put in your questions into the chat box. We have from our staff, Charlotte in Beijing office. She's going to monitor it, and after the first part of our session, where our chairs are going to give the regional taste, we have basically then the chance that Charlotte will read the questions and direct it to the person that you have been addressing it to. But that doesn't end there. So after the session of 90 minutes, if you still feel some questions are unanswered, please send it to Charlotte or the European Chamber staff, and they will relay it. And we pass it on to the local chairs. So there will be a possibility of follow-up. As some of you know, last week we had a very good session from a different angle with Ambassador Nicolas Chapuis, Ambassador to the European Union to China, as well as Bernhard Schwartländer, who is with the German embassy. He's a specialist ex-WHO, and Bradley Morrison from BSF talking about operations. So today we don't want that angle, diplomatic, medical, and basically operational. We want to have a local taste, which might, of course, touch upon some of these issues. As you have seen today, 76 cities are impacted. We have 1,383 local cases and a staggering 19,089 asymptomatic cases. And that more or less reflects also what happened in other countries, that you have many more asymptomatic cases than local cases. And Shanghai sticks out there because they apparently do very good tracing. The Shanghai is in effect in a situation where most of these asymptomatic cases are actually getting caught while in quarantine. So it looks like a very high figure. At the same time, it shows that Shanghai actually catches sort of the people and might actually be able to exit this, but more about this from our local chair, Bettina Schön, in a second. Again, today, the Caixin service PMI came out, and it was actually PMI in free fall, as we had January 51.4, meaning expanding segment. We still had February 50.2, and there was already some indications of COVID. 42 as of today is unprecedented. It just shows the magnitude COVID and the lockdown has on the service sector. And of course, the big worry for the Chinese government, I guess, is the impact it has on unemployment, the impact it has on business sentiment. Looking forward, am I going to employ more people? Am I going to be back in business? And there has to be a lot of rectification in order to actually stabilize that sector, which is, of course, the dominant area when it comes to employment across China. So I guess China really has a future unemployment issue. And in particular, as already last year, they had a crackdown on the tech sector. And many of these Alibabas, Didis, and Tencents are laying off tens of thousands of people, highly qualified people. So that's something to look at, and something I can imagine causes sleepless nights in Zhongnanhai. I will stop here. We have 90 minutes. The first 40 minutes, I guess, like in a soccer game, is going to be our chairs. And then we move straight to your questions. And I guess it's very informative. So let's start with Shenyang, with our longtime chair, Vice Chair Harald Kumfert. Harald, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon and good morning to Brussels, dear friends and colleagues. I hope you can hear me clearly, and let me give you some update from Shenyang, how the situation is here. We have not been in the headlines like Shanghai, but actually we're in a similar situation. The city is locked down for more than 10 days already, and including the airport is closed, so we have no international flights, we have no flights at all. So that's the situation we are in, and at the moment it's not clear when this lockdown will stop. We have there's a lot of impact, of course, on the companies. As you know, we have a BMW, BBA, BMW Brilliance here, and Michelin, the big companies, BASF. They're all closed. Some of them, the smaller companies, or some companies are able to operate with a small team, but it's becoming more and more difficult because of the supply chains are interrupted, and the employees have to stay in the factory and sleep and live actually in the factory. So there's a great impact. I would like to give you also some vivid examples here. We got a feedback from the bank. Company wanted to get a loan from the bank, and the bank said, "Oh, are you crazy? We cannot give any loan anymore because so many insolvencies, where so many companies go bankrupt. At the moment, there will be no loan given to companies, to SMEs, because we have so many companies already going bankrupt. At the moment, we cannot lend more money out." So there's a great impact on the big companies, on the service sector here. And the government, of course, has promised to support the companies. They have given policies to reduce the tax burden on the different plans, and also they promised after this wave is over, there will be a new round of supporting policies, not yet local policies, not yet published. So we are looking forward to this, but at the moment we don't know when this wave. So the companies here, large or small, they are mostly have accepted the situation as it is, and they have arranged themselves to get over this situation. But they are mostly concerned about the future because they don't see a strategy that will end this kind of on-off economy. So that means after the COVID wave will be before the COVID wave. This is what we all and absolutely unpredictable. So that's why we have communicated with our members, and they really would hope that the government would have a better communication. They would tell them earlier when they maybe start again, and they really hope that the government develops a long-term plan, the central government, to overcome the COVID pandemic for China as a whole. We also have some examples that companies actually wanted to donate and wanted to participate in the anti-COVID activities, but they were denied because they're foreign companies. So that is not really in line with the opening up policy and let the foreign companies to participate in this. So this is the impact. What we can sum it up, what the companies expect is our member companies, that really the business environment becomes again a predictable environment that can be used for planning, and also that the clear strategy to get out of the COVID situation, and with better vaccinations, with other measures. So this is what we have from Shenyang. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions now or during the VChat sessions.
Thank you very much, Harald. Maybe if you have some information on this one, can maybe briefly reflect on your neighboring province of Jilin. And I don't know how Dalian is faring, because Jilin, we have a factory there, is basically already since 4 weeks in very severe conditions. Companies operating in a closed loop since about 4 weeks. So if you maybe can just chip in what you know about the surrounding areas.
I just got the information today from our customer. Actually, they said, yeah, more than 4 weeks. It's a completely closed. They can only operate on a very small scale. But of course, supply chain, everything, it's very hard, logistic, very hard to manage. But the good sign is that there's hope on 11th of April. At least for Changchun, some of the restriction may be eased, and then they can resume again a normalized life, not completely open, but this is the hope at the situation at the moment from Jilin province.
Okay, thank you. Already one question popped up from Maxim for you, but we'll do this after our last speaker. Let's go down south slightly into Tianjin. And again, keep in mind, dear media, that all of us have daytime jobs, but please only quote us as this is on the record in our chamber position. So Christoph, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jörg, for that reminder, which is a good one. Good afternoon to the colleagues in China and good morning to the colleagues in Europe. I think Tianjin became very quickly famous earlier this year when there was the first outbreak of Omicron. And at that point in time, there was basically one big district which has been blocked for several weeks, where people could not leave the district and some people could not leave their flat. And since then, somehow Tianjin is fighting Omicron in a quite unpredictable way for all the companies how to manage the situation. During January, we faced 4 major citywide rounds of NAT tests, where with the most recent outbreak that restarted, let's say, end of February, we face much more localized testing, which makes it even more unpredictable. You find yourself in situations where people from one district cannot come to work as they have to undergo 3 consecutive days in a row NAT test. Just to give a flavor, as of today, we have still 180 buildings blocked and 31 compounds citywide. And even since yesterday, one complete district again had to undergo a 3 days consecutive NAT test. And it's always a type of gamble if the community allows you to go out directly after the test, or if you have to wait for a test result. We earlier offered end of January already, or mid of February, January, to the local government that companies would be willing to offer test stations so that people could leave to come to work. This request so far was not answered, or answered in that way that after the crisis is over, they'd like to discuss with us. But that might be, for some of us, maybe already too late. We see that as of today, we conducted a short survey, a flash survey a few weeks ago. At that point in time already, 2/3 have minimum lost 1 day of production, and it was a good case. Round about 45% lost minimum 3 days of production, and more than 13% 10 and more days. And the biggest difficulties our member companies faced were for sure the difficulties to get people to work in a reliable and predictable way. With this type of disruption of the production, which is unplannable, for sure, there will be deliveries of the goods. And not only for the workforce, but we also perceive and experience impact on the supply chain. That starts with NAT testing you have to do on imported goods that come either by sea freight or by air freight, which generate additional quarantine times and delays in the overall, anyhow, already charged and difficult supply chain situation. But sometimes you find yourself in a situation that you wait for more than 4 weeks to get chemicals analyzed for COVID in order to get them out of the quarantine area into your factory. Cross-province supply is very difficult. Our companies complain that their deliveries sometimes are blocked at the borderline or the city border. Trucks cannot enter, or you have to change drivers in order to make a supply chain somehow possible. That leads for minimum 30% of all of our members that they have a short term on their supplies, or even short term stop their production due to lack of supply and the interrupted supply chain. Another big impact industry took here is basically 70% of the companies mentioned that they are not really able to meet customers, and that for sure will have a long-term impact on how to develop business. If you're not able to really reach out to your customer and stay in a close contact with them, that might lower your business perspectives. And for sure, we still suffer from the very stringent visa and travel restrictions. Decoupling from our headquarters, where seeing is somehow believing, and no see means no belief and no trust, is a problem that grows day by day. So in a summary, since January, we took already several hits on our profitability and our performance, as daily operation becomes really largely unplannable and unpredictable. And in the current situation, where no international travel is possible, domestic travel is basically also much restricted or impossible. We're still looking forward also to get access to mRNA vaccines to be able to travel again, as we still have some international flights going out here in the region. And that is a crucial topic really for, on the one hand, retaining our talents, and on the other hand, attracting new talents. We have members that reported us that most recently, even newly hired, frankly refrained from coming to China in the given conditions. And that for sure will be detrimental for the business confidence and for the further business outlook as well in a city like Tianjin that heavily depends on production companies. That's a short summary and a short overview of the Tianjin situation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, our experiences, but generally, when you compare the number of expats with 2018-19, in 2021, we assume that only half have been left over. And the expectation is that after this summer, it might be cut by another half. And of course, so far operations could continue, but for future business and development, it's going to be a challenge. And just, you know, on the back of an envelope calculation, all the Europeans together, that means the Brits, the Norwegians, and the Serbians, and the EU, all put together in the bird's nest, all expats across China, put together in the bird's nest here in Beijing would still leave ample of space for other people. So we all fit into the bird's nest. That's pretty sad sight. But let me ask you, can you travel to Beijing, and would you be able to come back again from Beijing to Tianjin?
It looks like that it's possible. Just heard that Beijing is preparing again a new policy requesting kind of 7 days home quarantine before coming to Beijing. But if I would have taken the card today, I would have been able to come to Beijing. And I have also colleagues who made it today from Beijing to Tianjin. But what we also experienced, it was more difficult in the recent days, especially for local people, unfortunately. Many of them, their Beijing health code was just not accessible, so no chance to go back to their families in Beijing. They had to stay in Tianjin. It was not the same, fully the same case for non-Chinese people who still had a green Beijing health code, nevertheless living in Tianjin.
The hardware testing from stuff coming from abroad as well, even as chemicals, do you have now any idea if products, hardware, even chemicals coming out of Shanghai or Jilin is going to be equally tested? Because I assume that the virus might be of the same contagiousness coming from either abroad or Shanghai. I think, is there any experience you have already there?
For domestic products, so far, not
okay,
to my knowledge.
So there's still a different system. All right, then let's move on. We have Bettina Schön-Behansin. She's not only chair for Shanghai, but also she's vice president of the European Chamber. And of course, she has the most interesting city right now to present. So over to you, Bettina.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon from Shanghai, the city with the highest number of cases. And I think I can say Shanghai is in a kind of state of exception. There's a strong sense of uncertainty throughout the city, and it's fueled by supply shortages, endless lockdowns, and a really big fear of being sent to one of those central quarantine camps. So as you all know, Shanghai has currently implemented a two-stage staggered lockdown, splitting the city across the Huangpu River. And the aim was for sure to prevent a full city-wide lockdown. And ironically, this is exactly what has happened now. Shanghai has changed into a ghost city. So Pudong remains sealed, and Puxi's lockdown has been extended until further notice. So there are rumors saying it will end on April 15th, others say April 18th, but actually nobody knows. And what is really not typical for Shanghai is that there is really a lack of preparation before implementing these prevention and control measures. So first of all, we see a severe shortage of living necessities, particularly fresh vegetables. And citizens are unable to get their deliveries via their apps. So we have many people who report that they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and try to order food for themselves and also their parents, because especially for the old people, that's a nightmare. How should they order food via an app? And obviously there is a kind of black market which has developed, and they are asking for rocket high prices for fresh vegetables and fruits. So also some residents have started receiving food supplies from district level governments, distribution channels, but few vegetables are not sufficient to sustain citizens over lockdown with no clear end date. Then another really big fear is ending up in one of those mass central quarantine sites. The Shanghai Expo Center in Pudong area was repurposed as a mass central quarantine site to house more than 15,000 asymptomatic patients. And there is a shortage of manpower, so patients have been recruited as volunteers to distribute food and other goods. And today's news is that also the National Exhibition and Convention Center is now transforming into another square hospital, and it's expected to provide 40,000 beds and will be the city's largest square hospital. So those kind of, I call it camps, have no shower facilities, and people who go there are suggested to bring disposable underwear. And it's needless to say, you know, these are super spreader containment places, and it's very easy to get cross-infected, and it doesn't make sense. So another topic which has been discussed these last days was the separation of minors, of kids from their parents. We received the good news today that obviously after lobbying from foreign consulates and also a petition from residents of Shanghai, also Jörg mentioned it in many interviews, policymakers have now indicated that parents and kids can stay together if quarantined, regardless of whether they are tested positive or not. But also here is a lot of uncertainty, because in a press conference today, it was said that it's only for children with special needs, but it's not clear what are special needs. Is it for handicapped children, or what does it mean? So we need here clarity, we need definition. And also it seems that capacity is very limited. They talk about 1,000 beds available. That's definitely not enough. So we clearly request here that minors can self-quarantine at home with their families to guarantee physical and mental well-being of the children. I think this is really essential. Let's come to the impact on business. For sure, only very few companies get the permission to operate here, mainly in essential areas like food and pharma, but also for sure chemical industry, because they cannot just shut down a chemical site. So, but also if you have the permission to operate, it is very, very difficult. You for sure have to operate in closed loops. So many workplaces were in lockdown already for weeks and worked in such a kind of closed loop management where employees live on site for, in most of the cases, for 1 full week, sometimes even longer. And we hear more and more that some workers aren't volunteering anymore since there's no clear end to the lockdowns and they simply don't want to live on site for weeks and sleep in the factory or in the office. So also the other problem you have is for sure supply chains, because interprovincial transportation, it has been mentioned by my colleagues before, is very, very difficult because first of all, you are lacking truck drivers because they are stuck in lockdowns. It's very difficult to obtain a 40-hour COVID test and also all the other permits which you need. Regarding the Shanghai port, it's technically doing business as usual. However, the logistics black hole is caused by the restrictions for the truck drivers going around to surrounding provinces for cargo pickup. And our members estimate that week-on-week volumes in Shanghai port are down by 40%, 40. Ningbo port is trying to take up some of the shortfall. So in total, volumes are perhaps down 15 to 20%. Then what also developed just yesterday is that both airports, Pudong and Hongqiao, are running at very limited capacity as airport services cannot be insured. So international airlines cannot depart from Shanghai and they suspended their flights for at least this week. We have to see how long that goes because ground service cannot be insured. And for sure, getting goods to local airports is very difficult because there's a lack of trucks and also airports also have only limited staff to handle cargo due to the lack of transportation to get to the airport. So depending on how long the lockdown will last, it will definitely have quite a big impact on revenues in the coming months. Things are changing every day, so it will need close monitoring, but companies have started to do some risk monitoring and implement contingency measures, and they plan for 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months because nobody knows how long it will go. This for sure has a detrimental impact on Shanghai as a hub for Asia headquarter, because these lockdowns had and will have a huge impact on retention of foreign staff, who after being stuck here in China now for more than 2 years, decide to leave earlier than planned, and they are trying to get their families out of Shanghai until the situation stabilizes. So now with these international flights being canceled, people are really freaking out. And this dynamic zero COVID policy was already a huge detriment to attracting talents before. Now the current lockdown and its logistical nightmares is a final nail in the coffin for Shanghai's attractiveness to the rest of the world. And this will have definitely a long-term impact on talent retention and attraction in the coming years. So the impact on the quality of life, disruptions to education, all switch to online classes. And also we should not forget international schools, the impact, international teachers, students are leaving. So the big question is, how can international schools survive? And then there's this lack of basic supplies, fears of central quarantine policies, and its lack of appropriate sanitation fallacies. All this is really adding up to further taint Shanghai's image for prospective talent. So the situation is really having a huge detrimental impact on Shanghai's reputation as an international city to the rest of the world. And if Shanghai really still wants to be a contender as a potential hub for Asia headquarter, we really need to shift away from this mass testing and lockdowns, and we have to implement a strategy that prioritizes vaccinations instead. So this is the news from Shanghai. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I know from own company as well as lots of calls from Europe that everybody is stunned that this happens to the most sophisticated city in China. China always is viewed from the angle of Shanghai, the openness and the kind of urban sophisticated behavior, it's a shock. It's not in the middle of Hunan, it's Shanghai.
Exactly.
And I guess that's actually sort of makes it more challenging in order to get back there, in order to regain the kind of trust and allure that Shanghai had over the last 20 years. Anyhow, we move upriver to Nanjing, and we have Andreas Rich, my colleague there as chair. So Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, hello, warm welcome. Good morning to Europe and good afternoon to China from Nanjing, which is basically the home of big companies like Bosch, BSH, Siemens, BASF, Beals Controls, and Brembo, only to name some of the big companies that are our members. We had an Omicron outbreak here in Jiangsu that was basically hitting Nanjing, Changzhou, and Zhangjiagang. We are talking about an outbreak here with in total 609 cases. So there are only 68 infected and 541 asymptotic. So as this was the second outbreak after the 2021, so the local government have been very, very cautious, very strict measures. We had mass testing from the beginning. And when it was clear that we had single infections here, compounds have been closed around March 10th. Also, as of March 14th, people have been forced overnight only to go to their company if they have a 48 hours test. That was a challenge at the beginning because the test facilities have not been able to provide even a test in 24 hours, ending up in companies now every day sending people to test centers, of course, during the work time to get people tested and always having a fresh 48 testing certificate. So now, since after 3 weeks, Nanjing is slowly opening, gradually getting back to normal. So all the lockdown sites that have been closed for 1 week to 2 weeks, and I'm talking about compounds, not companies, are opening up. So it's still ongoing. They still on Monday this week made the 10th round of district-wide testing here. So they are very cautious. We had several challenges during that time that are still continuing because remarkable from the beginning, the shift of the responsibility to the companies, making sure that the people have been in negative tests, while it's hard to arrange because it's either arranged by the community or by the district or the development zone. So that was quite challenging, while also the government encouraged people to mostly work from home, while also companies that had the need to work on to continue work have been also supported. Everybody spoke about the clear guidance from the government on remote work and response to the infection within the workspace was still missing and is somehow still unclear. So a lot of companies complained that this was left on their side. Of course, there was a financial burden and still is for the companies for the test, sanitization, and quarantine and disinfection, especially for the logistics and the warehouses, and lack of capacity for this regular disinfection COVID testing still ongoing. So you might guess if every company sent its people to the testing sites, there are not many available, especially because the communities only test every second day. So we had in all companies a lot of work time due to the test requirements, and that was mainly between March 14 and 27. Traffic control, this was mentioned before, also from Shenyang, Tianjin, and Shanghai, is a concern not only for the inbound goods due to the ports and the logistic shortages that we have worldwide, but especially due to the truck drivers. And Nanjing is very restrictive, not letting people in without quarantine, without testing. They put public toilets on the outside so that truck drivers can do the necessary things while they are waiting for their negative result. Business trips are not possible actually, so we cannot travel out of Nanjing without risking a quarantine in other cities still. That will maybe fade away within the next week. On the other side, also necessary business trips from abroad are not possible. We have still the visa and quarantine problem, and actually in that outbreak, everything was stopped. Some factories, and these are very few ones, had a direct loss because they have shut down, faced shutdowns, but mostly others are mainly suffering from delay in deliveries and turnover, which might then also destroy their quarterly one result, which is important for most of European companies. One of the most challenges when opening up here was that the electronic systems, the QR code system, was not really using the standard tools like WeChat or Alipay. Everybody could have its health QR code, which also worked for foreigners, because in Nanjing, like other cities, they established a local system where suddenly foreigners couldn't apply because only Chinese IDs have been possible. So this allows you access to companies or to local sites or all public areas, which was a big shock for the foreign community here, which we luckily could resolve within 3 days with strong communication from the European Chamber Chapter Nanjing office here by advocating this and getting also the possibility to use the Alipay app that most foreigners can apply to. So basically now it's somehow eased up, it's opening up, but we have to say that this is not a single Nanjing issue. When we look in other cities of Jiangsu, we have the burden that different cities have different access codes, have different possibilities to go into the cities and have different requirements. And especially foreigners with passports cannot easily apply on most of these apps. So here certainly we have to look short term also on a possibility to have a harmonization if the opening up is ongoing. Yeah, long-term effects in Nanjing is still the airport is still suspending any international flights since the outbreak July 2021. So that means still it's a Nanjing specific item with long-term impact on the international business. And also the business confidence is decreasing, especially for foreign direct investment. And I myself spoke to some companies who've done M&A measures, but the outlook is quite negative on this, as long as they cannot come to China for visits, meetings, on-site visits, on-site observation and negotiation. There are still some questions remaining, like what is the impact on international medical education providers that are retreating from this city, from this area here? What is the impact of future investments and its development, which is still an ongoing concern? And we talked about the COVID entity already. Foreign nationals, do they want to leave? Do they want to stay? So there are still big question marks here that we have to face and where we work with our members too. So that's all short overview of Nanjing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. And again, Nanjing is a manufacturing powerhouse. And again, like March and April 2020, when actually operations kept ongoing, the fact that already downriver Shanghai is in such trouble already has caused more supply chain issues than were faced about 2 years ago. And at the same time, there has been positive responsiveness from the Nanjing government on a couple of things. So there seems to be also some flexibility. But I move on to South China now. The chairman is Klaus Senkel, also vice president of the chamber, based in Shenzhen. And again, our chapter there has 2 operations, 2 offices, one in Guangzhou, one in Shenzhen. So Klaus, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jörg. And good afternoon to China and good morning to Europe. And I am here in Shenzhen, and we have 2 offices, as Jörg mentioned, Guangzhou and Shenzhen. And in South China, the chamber has about 280 members. And the recent 7-day lockdown in Shenzhen was just another blast, I call it, in a more than 2 years lasting pandemic and the related restrictions. The company is already challenged by the lack of international talent, travel restrictions, supply chain interruptions, sky-high shipping costs, shipping delays, flight tickets hike. And the GPA in the Greater Bay Area in the South China, which includes also Hong Kong and Macau, need talent to grow to the next level. But even the cross-border travel to Hong Kong has come to a halt. Hong Kong cross-border traffic and transportation has been limited too. So, and also these in the South China overseas packages need to be inspected for the virus. The effects of this lockdown, I think, will have long-term consequences for businesses in South China and entire China. And it demonstrates a lack of foresight and adaptability by the policymakers. As long as the lockdowns and travel restrictions continue unrelieved, China risks more isolation and deteriorating the confidence from the international business community. So we can see this and we can hear this when we listen to our members, and not only to our members, also to local people. During this lockdown, multinational companies were able to practice this closed loop management. So workers would work, eat, sleep, and do PCR tests on the facility. Nobody can leave, but you can produce, but still they cannot ship and deliver goods to their customer. So I was able to visit one of our members just 2 days after the lockdown was over. I could see in the entrance area many foldable beds. They said they will still keep it. They don't know what will happen in the future. And they said they were not producing at full capacity, but at least 70 to 80% of the people. And yeah, they were glad that they got the permission to do this. Anyway, multinationals could probably weather this storm, but they are also running out of patience. And but talking about SMEs and maybe some other service companies, they didn't have this privilege and had to wait during the 1 week lockdown. Many companies had delivery schedules and small companies could not produce, so they had to delay their production and subsequent shipment to their customer. So they are not able to manage to do the closed loop management. So can't produce means you can't deliver and can't serve your customer. So SMEs may face bankruptcy when they cannot deliver their products to the customer. And of course, if you can't travel around in China now, it's also difficult to visit your customer, and that is also hitting the business as well. So we hope that this kind of situation will get more relief in the sooner the better. And then coming back to Shenzhen, it is declared as the Silicon Valley of China. It might get an image hit due to these COVID restrictions, less foreign talents, loss of attractiveness. Certainly, Shenzhen government is doing a lot to ease the pain. However, the overall impression of the international community overrules these efforts. On the other hand, Shenzhen is important for global economy and supply chain with its high-tech manufacturers and a lot of multinational technology firms here in Shenzhen. This is despite all the efforts in these Shenzhen by the Shenzhen government to bring the talent, the city's international status will gradually become tainted as foreign talent may use other options and move elsewhere. Also, during this citywide lockdown in Shenzhen, many people thought that it is now getting worse and or similar than 2 years ago when all started in Wuhan. But luckily, that time the opening was quite smooth. After the lockdown, it went back to the new normal with other regulations still in place. And so he's still doing 48 hours testing and so on. And there's still some cases in Shenzhen, isolated cases where there are some smaller lockdowns. And yeah, just some facts. Shenzhen has 17 million population, and 7 days testing every day means more than 100 million tests they did in a week's time. No matter is the best intention of local officials, the handling of the recent Omicron crisis in China and in Shenzhen is perceived by the few Europeans who are still here, but more also important by locals working or not working for foreign companies as an overreaction, harsher than the deadlier pandemic maybe 2 years ago. It costs too much money for everyone. So that's, you can, when you listen to the people, you can hear this. Okay, the policies which were implemented 2 years ago, they kept us safe in the past, and the same policies are now choking us. And if a balance was found, the economic power of the Greater Bay Area would contribute to relieve the public health stress. So this is kind of really some wasting money. And then some side effect about this communication about the COVID and imported cases and so on. In recent weeks, we have been reported numerous discrimination incidents where foreigners were refused to access parks and other public places. It looks like the word imported COVID case has been confused by many as imported by foreigners. So in China, if China continue this claim to claim openness, discrimination must be stopped. So I think this is very important also, and we hope that this kind of side effect will stop soon. So thank you very much, and this is all from the south so far. Jörg?
Yeah, thank you very much, Klaus. We move to the west, where we also have two offices in Chongqing and Chengdu. Our vice president and chair for that chapter, Massimo Bagnasco, is based in Chengdu. So over to you.
Thank you, Jörg. Good morning to our friends in Europe, and good afternoon to our media and members here in China. So far, luckily, the Southwest China was not heavily touched. We had a few weeks ago some cases in Chongqing, and recently an outbreak in Chengdu, but so far there are just 33 cases up to now in town. Anyway, we are concerned because the zero case strategy principle, even with a few cases already, create matter in some operation and activity of our members, especially in the service sector, both in Chongqing and Chengdu. And on top of that, of course, our members operate on a not only on local scale, but nationwide scale. So they become really concerned about the outbreak dimension and spreading out, since it's going to influence all their supply chain and client as well in China. And we see that as far as we have one area under lockdown, the impact is not just on that area. So there is a really diffuse sense of uncertainty and huge concern about the upcoming development, which create, from the business point of view, suspension, delay in new activity, in the plans, and in the order. My colleague before from the other chapter already touched several of the industry sector. Then I would like to mention a little bit more about the service sector, which represent an important stake of our members, and especially the education sector. Education sector is one where we continue to face some of the same issue related to the ongoing regulation. And in the recent weeks, the concern locally are directly related to the communication of expectation, especially about the COVID testing. We are definitely willing to be compliant with the testing regulation and rules, but the frustration of our members in this sector is that it appears that there is no clear plan for testing. The communication from the government sometimes are confusing and last minute. They often get notification from community offices, district offices, and even city offices. And so there is no one single agency to ask or to report to and to expect information. And we found that this lack of communication between agencies requiring business to do multiple time reporting, different format to different entities, and to have to react at last minute changes and communication, even at reasonable hours, and turn around all the timelines. We have definitely issue on operation. As I said before, the supply chain is a nationwide one. And again, all the supply coming from the East Coast or going back to the west of the world have influence here. And much more if we look at the medium term for investment and the new activities. The European companies, but also the Chinese company, are living a period of time in which they want to keep very cautious on their activity. So every talking about new action is definitely not in place nowadays. And if we look to our community of foreign people living here, we feel that they are really frustrated by a further tightening of the entry procedure to China. We have people who haven't been back home for 2 years, and they can't imagine to face again measures to getting back to China, which are even harder than at the beginning of the pandemic. This is really a matter which influenced a lot the retainment of the foreign staff, especially if we look at C-level professional or technicians or specialists, and make it almost impossible to attract new one, because definitely China, from what is seen abroad, is not more so a destination for them. And so what we require, what we ask is really national level action to guarantee a reasonable procedure to enter into China, as well as at local level proper action to support the retainment and the attraction of new staff. China did a lot, implemented a lot of action to control the virus, but nowadays we still didn't see enough action to prevent the action of the virus. And I'm talking about vaccination. The mRNA vaccination in China, the vaccine is still not available. And this is really a matter which could really help to contrast the outbreak that we have nowadays with more confidence about the potential impact which will have on all the community, on all the people living in this country. So again, we are concerned of what could be the wave coming from the east of the pandemic, and we wish that action on a more prevention level could be done, especially on the vaccine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we come to the end of our chapters, and before we open up the question again, Charlotte is going to read it out, so shoot the questions in. Let me just add a couple of words to this. Again, our colleagues mostly are in manufacturing, and again, you have a European view on this one. But again, I think the major impact, as already indicated by the PMI data from Caixin this morning, is on the service sector. And of course, that also is a major concern to us with its ripple-on effect. I mean, you can see, for example, in the Natixis report on their index of mobility, highway traffic, box offices, and so forth, that maybe still the first quarter of this year is slightly better than during 2020, but it's getting very, very close. And of course, the consumption of durables has been going down. Consumption as a whole is being challenged. So even if you want to order online, you might actually not get it. And we're talking about the big cities, the big consumption centers of China. And of course, you have seen the car sales plummeting by 28%, retail is down. And of course, the real estate sector is a major worry to us. The real estate sector that has already been in very deep and troubled waters has already taken a hit, because if you are on lockdown, you can't check on new apartments or new places. Sentiment is down. You want to keep the money close to yourself. And we have seen quite a downturn in the real estate sector, which of course, according to Rogoff in his recent paper, is 25% of the GDP in China. So it really does matter. And Natixis made a calculation that says, you know, if 1 percentage point in mobility index goes down, so will 0.22 percentage of deceleration in China's GDP growth. And according to their mobility index downturn already now, that should shave off 1.8% of the first quarter of GDP. So there we go. UBS has already lowered its estimation from 5.5% to 5% to 4%. And nobody really knows. Let me also say that, of course, we are talking about the big centers here. These cities that we just covered are nearly European country sizes. And of course, we don't know what's happening in the countryside. We don't know what the villages, the counties are doing. Are they covered data? Do they have no cases? What's coming in from there? I draw your attention to the sentiment of the European business community, in particular the German business community, as last week on the 1st of April, no joke there, it was coming out with a very good survey about the sentiment concerning COVID, and in particular the sentiment out of the headquarters. And the survey went beyond COVID and also covered the sentiment in headquarters and in offices here concerning the Ukraine war and China's stance on this one. It's a worrisome paper to read. It in many ways resembles what we have seen from our peers from AmCham last week as well. So check it out. Again, we talk about European business. In some areas, we have just heard that we have slightly different concerns than the domestic peers of ours. But as a major take, we could say we're all in there together. We all suffer from the same challenges. And of course, Chinese companies are struggling as much as we do, sometimes even more so. And again, what we have in surveys, you can see in the PMI responses. So I guess the 1st of May is going to be very interesting to see what the April PMI sentiment is. Manufacturing PMI was already negative, and today's service sector figures were certainly a bit of a shocker. I very often hear the comparison, of course, China cannot open up. China has a different structure in view of the fact that, of course, Europe now goes to normal. Sweden stopped measuring. Germany will do the same in May. We have more or less coming back to normal in many countries in this world. And I particularly would like to point out that India has basically opened up. Same population size, very different level of sophistication than China. Much poorer, much worse medical facilities. Yes, they have gone through a very, very difficult period of time with many death cases. But again, keep in mind that this has been primarily Delta case, whereas we are now talking about a different vaccine, a different measure, different mutation of this. We talk about the Omicron, which is less harmful than the other two mutations we were facing in 2020, 2021. So India, in a way, my example is always there are now 4 flights anticipated between Europe and China by Chinese airlines for the summer, whereas Emirates, for example, from Abu Dhabi has indicated they are opening up last week 170 daily flights 170 flights a week into India. So that already shows that China might be the last country opening up. So that would, of course, not be very good because China stands for 25% of global growth. So if China has a hiccup, I think we all have a major cold elsewhere in the world. The supply chains, we can discuss this maybe later, are going to be impacted. And Natixis said once, 30% of any product in the world has some sort of China in there. So if China's supply chain take a hit, that certainly has ramifications about availability, about prices, choices, and so forth. So we need China to succeed to get out of that as soon as possible. We cannot have China falling back. And again, I guess everything has to do with vaccine. We have been saying this many times. The Chinese vaccine is not bad, in particular if you have 3 shots. The booster shot is vital But again, we think that mRNA is a better solution. mRNA has been discussed in Shanghai since spring 2020. They anticipated to start production in late 2020. Nothing happened. And it's a lost opportunity in order to have a very strong performing, credible vaccine in the Chinese marketplace. So let me finish by saying that, of course, what do we want? In a way, we would like what I would call the Singapore model, that China studies the Singapore model about opening up gradually, about vaccine, very strong vaccine. China actually has delivered Sinovac and Sinopharm into Singapore. There can be a comparison, but Singapore stresses a different vaccine as a booster. That also could be indicative. And of course, Singapore has a totally different policy. If you have Omicron, you basically can stay at home, you self-test. You are basically keeping yourself away from the streets in order to ease it. You don't have these catastrophic pictures of 15, 20, or as Bettina pointed out, nearly 40,000 people in one spot. That is not what we really would like to see. So let me also end here before Charlotte takes over, of saying that in the past, we always had press conferences, business confidence service, basically exuding optimism, saying that we are in China for China. Our data set always was better, particularly over the last 2 years. We had very good sales in 2020, 2021. And of course, now it seems like that China is falling behind quite rapidly. But again, I think the chamber has always been advocating this might be a short-term or medium-term significant hiccup, but it doesn't take away the shine and the allure of the Chinese market long-term. As we have pointed out in our last position paper, China, even worst case, is going to have a very strong growth pattern until 2050. Of course, we outlined that China has a choice how to grow strongly if they globalize, opening up, or if they muddle through, then of course, sort of second best. And of course, it has a very low projection if it goes down the road of self-reliance. So in a way, nowadays, we have board meetings, we have these sessions with you on negative topics about Ukraine, impact on reputation as well as on headquarters. We have energy shortage, that was last September, and now we have COVID. So it actually indicates that it's a far more complex business environment than we ever experienced before. So I end here and Charlotte takes over. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Jörg. Yes, we have indeed received quite a lot of questions from both members and media. Because this is a media roundtable, we will give priority to the questions raised by media. And if we have time towards the end, we will also include questions from members. I would also like to remind all the chairs to try to be concise and to the point in your answers. So the questions we have received from the media seems to be centered on 3 main topics: about the treatment between foreign and domestic companies, the impact on international talent, and operations and supply chains. So maybe first, Jörg, I direct a question for you. A combined question from Andreas from DPA and Evelyn Chen from CNBC. What are the dangers for the global economy if China slows down further, almost comes to a standstill with an escalation of COVID cases? And how has the view from headquarters changed on China operations over the last few weeks? Are there any plans to add or decrease support for local operations?
Well, of course, again, China stood for 25% or even more in the past years of global growth. China matters. China has become the production point of this world. But of course, now the reversal, the world comes back to normal and China enters the crisis, possibly with a 2-year delay of what other countries went through, will of course have an impact. And we have seen it already now. First of all, on the export data, I mean, the world was basically buying up anything that China could produce because they had problems back home. And also China was a perfect supplier for goods that you need in lockdown, electronics, medical stuff, and so forth. That is going to stop. China will have a major challenge on the export side. And China, in many ways, relies on exports in order to keep consumption high. Someone has to consume Chinese products. And again, the consumption problem we have here have been partly compensated by Europeans. Europe, after all, last year bought goods from China in the magnitude of 1.6 billion euro a day whereas we were only shipping 600 million euro a day into China. So if the European customer is going to shift elsewhere, of course, that is a problem. Europe has been the driving force in many ways for high-tech employment in China, and we should keep that in mind. The other one is, of course, the port situation. Again, Bettina was already outlining what some of our members say, how double-digit fall in handling in ports. The ports are vital. Last year's experience with Ningbo has sent shockwaves through the system. And again, we have to really hope that China has enough redundancies in how to maintain a certain operation at the ports, because China needs this kind of connections, not just for import, but also for export. And that's a major worry of us, that this bottleneck is going to get hurt. And of course, the discussions are ongoing back home in a way, as the German chamber pointed out, not only with COVID, but also because of China's strong support on the rhetoric and media concerning Ukraine, how reliable China is, and basically how investable it is to be in China. And I guess I'll leave this up to my colleagues back home in the headquarters to explain. But for all of us, of course, it's a day-to-day. Again, China's not a country, it's a continent. So we should not assume if Shanghai has a problem, the rest of China has a problem. Still, you have an outlet here, an outlet there. And we have to keep in mind that China as a whole will not, I guess, go into lockdown and this kind of nothing happens anymore over here. It will be regional wise, and the Chinese government will go into the whack-a-mole mode, basically trying to fight local hotspots. But it's there going to be. And China has to really beef up the herd immunity of its population. China has 150 million people that are above 75 years old and hardly have been vaccinated. We have seen what it does to Hong Kong, and 150 million is exactly the population of Japan. That really has to happen. The vaccine has to spread even with Chinese boosters in order to actually take away the fear that this is gonna kill as many people as it did maybe in India. It can be dealt with differently, but I think it requires a different mindset. The perception in the West is Omicron is sort of a stronger flu, and you just stay at home. In China, still COVID is always associated as if it would be the plague. I think there needs a bit more of education also from the Chinese authorities to take the fear away in order to make people more comfortable to live with this kind of uncertainty. But again, the fragile and the elderly have to be protected, and that should be the focus number one. What it does to the global economy, it could be inflationary. The less China produces, the less choice you have, the more prices go up. And that, of course, in an environment which already has been in some quarters been inflationary, that's going to be a problem. Commodities have been jacking up because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that, of course, would be fatal to some quarters. And of course, the global economy will definitely also look into what it does to their respective employment, as we are sending again $600 million euro of goods into China, into the car industry, into the chemical industry, and other areas. If these areas take a major hit, then of course it ripples on all the way to our employment back home. So the impact is going to be there. And again, it's in our interest that China actually makes it possible in order to come out of this in a decent format, at least this year. And there are, again, examples. China doesn't have to start from scratch. The Singapore model can be studied and implemented.
Thank you, Jörg. And speaking about the supply chains and production, we have received a few questions. We will go to Harald and to Bettina. We've spoken a lot about the supply chain difficulties at the local level. Are we at the point yet where you would expect big disruption to the local supply chains, especially given the prospect of a lengthy lockdown in Shanghai? And can you also elaborate on how the automakers and its supply chain has been affected in the past weeks under Changchun and Shanghai lockdown? Will this time be different from 2020, when China was somehow strengthened as a key supply chain hub and export powerhouse? Maybe we start with Harald.
Yeah, let me just brief you on supply chain. Of course, the BMW factory as the key source of government tax revenue has been kept running until the last moment here. But what actually stopped them was their supply chain. So BMW had to stop because the supply chain could not be maintained. So the supply chain disruption here is because all the automobile industry is highly interconnected, is tremendous. But at the end of the day, Shenyang and the whole Jilin province went into a lockdown, and Jilin province for more than 4 weeks now, and Shenyang for nearly 2 weeks. So I think the supply chain, to talk about this, is a secondary problem now, because nobody can walk. Actually, nobody is allowed to leave the compound, and any transportation has been stopped. And on the road, you cannot even you will be caught by the police if you're on the road and you don't have a special permission. So that's about the supply chain from our side. There was another question regarding Shenyang, the difference of treatment between foreign companies and Chinese companies regarding COVID treatment. So we cannot see any difference in treatment between foreign and Chinese companies regarding the lockdown. Actually, the preference is given to the big taxpayers, and they had a bit better conditions here. But in general, there was no distinction. As I mentioned already, a major European medical product and service supplier in Shenyang was not allowed to participate in the anti-COVID measures here. They want to donate something, their services and products, and they could not participate as a foreign company. So there we will see a bit different treatment, but not for the normal COVID measures.
Thank you, Harald. Maybe we go to Bettina to get the perspective from Shanghai.
Let me continue with Shanghai. So from what we hear is that Shanghai is in lockdown, and for sure most of the factories are in lockdown. So the same counts for the automotive industry. And even if they were operating, it's very difficult for them to get materials, to get manpower, and also to deliver the products out. So this is for sure a major impact for the automotive industry, as we know how important China is. Many car makers, they produce the majority or a huge percentage, like 30–40% of their cars here in China. And depending on how long this lockdown will last here in Shanghai, it will have definitely a huge impact.
Thank you. We have actually received a lot of questions regarding the situation in Shanghai.
Yeah.
But before we moving into that, I would like to quickly go to Christoph. And also to Jörg, if you would like to jump in. There's been a lot mentioned about the impact on foreign companies and foreign talent. How is the sentiment now in the Shenyang chapter? And overall, how will this impact European companies' plan on China going forward? Are European companies still here for the long term? Or do they foresee not only an exodus of the international talent, but also the production for foreign market?
Yep, thanks for this question. I think for sure we all keep the long-term sight, which is, it's for the companies being here in many cases a very important market. And therefore they committed to stay. But what we have to face as well, and that's the actual situation, the difficulties really to a certain extent to survive is the crucial personnel. Yeah. And I repeat what I said, it's difficult to retain talents. We see people who arrived here 1.5–2 years ago, they basically experienced China under lockdown. They like to really get to know the country, and under these conditions, for sure, you will not consider to stay another year or a few more years, when you never know if you really can travel, if you really can go back. And that is definitely a short-term threat that for sure for the companies here in Tianjin also has to be overcome. And for small companies, one person who cannot come can be already a kind of heavy impact on the future operations, which cannot be avoided. So this we face and we have to manage, and we clearly see the Europeans at that point in time are really not willing to come under these conditions to China.
Well, let me add on to this one, and maybe just to give everyone a sense of what we are talking about is, again, we talk about 2020, 11,000 Germans being in the whole of China, 12,000 French, the whole of China, and we assume that figure has eroded already by now. Again, my picture of all the Europeans, including the other non-EU countries, could fit in easily in the bird's nest. We talk about a very, very small number of people, but these are high impact people. These are the connections to headquarters. These are researchers. These are top managers. And they are the ones that actually want to have more people over here. As we pointed out in our last position paper, China is, of course, a huge market, the future of everything, despite all the hiccups we face now. And it's like a fitness center where you can do big things, and you want your staff around the world in order to experience this. And of course, you cut yourself off if you can't actually have your young people here for 3 or 4 years experience of this. And of course, the impact is not just that headquarters are scratching their heads of maybe we have to shift a couple of high-tech areas to Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, or Singapore, also because of the new situations in the legal system, where data transfer laws, for example, make research work far more dicey. And we talk about IT decoupling. So, I mean, it all fits into a perfect storm. How much does China want to participate and benefit from European high tech, or do they actually want to shift a gear lower and go down the road of high tech in a slower mode without Europeans? And of course, the question gets even more interesting if the crisis goes on like this. If foreign companies are shifting elsewhere, it's not going to be necessarily foreign experts that are leaving, because there's so few of them anyhow here. It might mean that they lure Chinese top-end talents to work out of other countries. And these might be very interested families to move on, to have a normal life back in Sweden or in Bangkok or other places. We have to keep in mind that this also might be a side effect, that Chinese top-end talents might be leaving China, which is to the detriment of what the government actually wants to have. With some really, I must say, high-end technical expertise is voting with their feet right now. And it's certainly, from China's point of view, not in the right direction.
Thank you, Jörg. Speaking about keeping still on the international stuff, there's a direction that the COVID-19 zero policy is not looking to change anytime soon. For Bettina in Shanghai, which is currently under lockdown, how is there a sense among the Shanghai business community that they may demand a airlift of expat by their respective governments, similar to what we saw in Wuhan, when many European governments started to evacuate foreign nationals? And in the long term, how can you run an international company without international staff?
Yes, I mean, looking at the situation here, what I just described, there is a lack of food supply. Families are very scared that they will be separated from their children, and people are afraid they could be transported to these really terrible mass central quarantine centers. This causes a lot of anxiety. And yes, we had already here and there some people asking us if those kind of airlifts would be organized. So far, this is not planned. Maybe a kind of outbound charter flights could be an option. But for the moment, there is nothing planned. And I think it really all depends how the situation goes on, how long we will be here in a lockdown, and yeah, when the government has all this under control. And the most important is when they start to take other measures to open up.
Thank you. And the last few questions we received from media is about operations. So we have a question from Los Ecos. I may want to direct this question to Andreas, Klaus, and Massimo to give some insight from the local perspective about the closed loop. do you on a local level see any of this closed loop system? Are many factories allowed to operate in a closed loop, or is it a marginal phenomenon? And in which industrial sectors do you see it, and from which sectors appear to be benefiting from it? Also, I will throw in a quick member question here as well, which is on a similar topic. Have any foreign companies which are operating in lockdown areas have to adjust their workplace safety standards to continue operating? Maybe we start with Andreas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, maybe I reply this from the perspective of the machinery industry. So we have still a workable operational support network when it comes to suppliers. So the reason is that normally machinery companies have special demand, have special suppliers that are spread all over China, and they are not in lockdown. Like take Nanjing, we haven't been really closing down companies here. On the other side, when you have suppliers in Liaoning, for example, where you have big casting suppliers, then you have a problem if they are closed down. Let's compare it. Actually, in our business, the contrary was the case. So our German headquarters asked us to support supplies because they have even had problems because of the big sick leaves due to Corona in Germany, and it goes vice versa. So yes, the supply chain is disrupted, but it's not completely interrupted. So there are still for SMEs companies that can produce, and you have still a lot of suppliers in areas which are still producing. That makes it somehow bearable. However, the logistic itself is a problem to get the parts from A to B, from Suzhou to Nanjing, for example, while drivers cannot cross borders. That is a major concern. And customers, especially in the machinery business, cannot come to acceptance tests, which then also delay your delivery and turnover, which might be a temporary issue. But for some companies, when it is about receiving the money for the goods, it's also an existential issue.
Yes, Charlotte. And from Southwest China side, we don't have an issue right now, because as I mentioned, we are hopefully in a better condition right now, but we are concerned what could happen. We have issue in the supply of some materials that should come from other part of China. And of course, we have issue about delivery of our products in other part of China. And I would like to take the chance to reiterate what Jörg was saying before about the importance of individuals that we have in our industry, and especially in our service sector. The foreign community here represent people, professionals with deep experience and know-how, which paid a very great effort along this year also to support the development of China. And especially nowadays, when we are all aware that the soft power of China is eroding, especially abroad, I would like to say once more that we can be the best ambassador of China abroad. And so it's very important to retain us. We really welcome last day of the 2021, the confirmation of the individual income tax procedure that we had before as an important signal towards the foreign community. And in this regard, we really hope that something else could be done now, but again, in the interest of the foreign community and the local people, especially for the vaccination with mRNA. Thank you.
Maybe on the closed loop discussion, let me chip in a couple of things. First of all, of course, the local government has a high interest to keep those companies going that are the best taxpayers. For obvious reasons. But secondly, also depends on what kind of complexity you have. If you, for example, produce vitamin C in Shenyang, you flip a switch when the government says shut down, and then basically you go home. It's very easy. If you have a chemical site with a couple of production sites interconnected, it might take 4 to 5 days to close down. And then it might take more than a week or 2 weeks in order to synchronize the comeback of these facilities. So of course, the local government wants to maintain production there because it happens to be the industry of industries. If they go off, it has an incredible ripple-on effect. But secondly, also shutting down and starting up again has security implications. So you put people into these sites, and you can see it with Sinopec, PetroChina, and all the others, basically trying to keep running. But of course, at one stage, if the customer cannot take your stuff anymore and you have filled all your warehouses, the question arises, how can I continue? And again, as Harald was pointing out, Jilin has been in lockdown for 4 weeks. And my experience is you cannot exchange people in a lockdown, in a closed loop situation, because you can't get new stuff into the factories because they can't get there. Given the transportation constraints. So you have people 4 weeks sleeping at a factory and working there. And of course, that is going to be very disruptive. We talk about sleep deprivation. We talk about lesser awareness of what's going on. We talk about possible accidents deriving from that. Hence, it's very important that also these closed loops get the local support in order to exchange stuff so people are not stuck in factories as they are in Jilin, as they are in Shanghai. But again, I think companies talk to local governments, but it is incredibly stressful to individuals to do that.
Thank you, Jörg. Klaus, if
Yeah,
we could
and,
get a local perspective.
Yes, okay, for the closed loop management in Shenzhen, I know several member companies. They had done this, and they have to fulfill certain regulations. I mean, only one company on the compound, the facilities that people can sleep there, and that you can perform the PCR test also on the compound. So this is and not any specific industry. We saw it in automotive, we saw it in healthcare, we saw it also in communication, like mobile phone production. So this is okay. And for operations, I mean, you can see that many companies they have a much longer lasting stock than in usual times. So they may have increased their stock value in order to be ready when there's a lockdown, when there's an outbreak, so they can produce, but still the shipping will be an issue. Anyway, that is what was happening. I saw it when I visited one company in the healthcare, so they still have the foldable beds in their compound. Another thing what I would like to mention, that this whole pandemic, which lasts more than 2 years now and affects surely that Greater Bay Area and Shenzhen, especially, which have quite a strong innovation output. And to have this innovation output, you need to have international talent. You have talent from China, from international, but this cannot happen now. The talent exchange should happen in both directions, going to Europe and coming from Europe to China. So this doesn't happen, and we hope that China will open soon. That is, at the moment, I almost would call it a joke if it wouldn't be true that it is faster to travel to the moon than to travel to China. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights from the South China. We are about to close this roundtable with 1 minute to go. Jörg, I'll just quickly like to forward to you if you can give us a very quick, concise answer. Because we discussed previously about state-owned companies and with foreign and domestic, but have you seen any difference between state-owned companies and private companies in general?
Well, you can see it very obvious in the PMI results. The NBS PMI is always more positive, meaning SOEs are less hit by these COVID conditions, lockdown conditions, and their outlook, at least last month, was still above 50, whereas Caixin, which resembles more coastal areas as well as SMEs, has been below 50. So there's a definite difference in staying power also in finance and in credibility of getting loans from banks in order to get support from local government. Sure, there's going to be a difference, but at the same time, China has to be aware that actually the future of China relies more on private enterprises, on entrepreneurs, on the service sector, that this is functioning, and a shift from layoffs of SMEs into SOEs, given the magnitude, is impossible. So I guess China really has to look into also in particular the SMEs from China. And again, we are niche players. We can just sort of voice these areas. The concern is far deeper among our Chinese peers.
Thank you very much. So this will conclude our media roundtable for today. Thank you all very much for participating, both to our media friends, our members, and our various colleagues from the Chamber and European embassies and consulates. Thank you to President Wuttke and all our local chapter chairs. If you have any follow-up questions after the webinar or would like to get a quote from any of the spokespersons today, you're welcome to contact me. My name is Charlotte, and I'm the Policy and Communications Coordinator at the Chamber. You can reach me at my email, csvensson@europeanchamber.com.cn. I will type it in the chat before I leave so that you can find it there. Please take note that all European Chamber spokespersons are to be quoted in their chamber capacity. You may find it displayed on the screen here. Thank you very much, and wish you all a lovely afternoon and a good morning for those dialing in from Europe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Stay
Bye-bye,
safe
and
and
thank
healthy.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.